In today's video, we'll look at 3 more cases that were closed in 2020. But before that, we want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Magellan TV. A great docudrama that is available on Magellan TV is The Family Inside the Manson Cult. It gives a fascinating insight into the Manson family, and it has some haunting reenactments. The Family Inside the Manson Cult is just one of thousands of documentaries that are available on Magellan TV. Magellan TV has more than a great collection of true crime documentaries. Their selection of history documentaries is outstanding as well. They have enthralling documentaries about the most evil people who ever lived. Magellan TV is easy to access. It can be watched anywhere, at any time, on your TV, laptop, or mobile device. It works with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Google Play, Apple TV, and iOS, and you can even cast from your phone to your TV. Magellan TV has a special offer for criminally listed viewers. Just go to try.magellantv.com/criminally listed and you'll get a month for free. So check out Magellan TV because you'll find something awesome to watch and you'll also be supporting Criminally Listed. Number 3. Anna Mejia and Nicholas Connors. In the winter of 1994, Anna Mejia was 24 years old. She lived in an apartment in Long Branch, New Jersey, with her boyfriend, her son, and her daughter. In early December 1994, her boyfriend was arrested for cocaine possession. During an undercover sting, several pounds of cocaine was found in his car. On the night of December 8, 1994, Anna was at home with her 2 children. The police were called when someone found her murdered in her apartment. Her children were found unharmed in the apartment. Anna's throat had been slashed and she had been stabbed 23 times. A white powder had been rubbed on her face and shoved up her nose. At first, the police thought it was cocaine. Instead, it turned out to be baby formula. The police thought that Anna's murder might be connected to her boyfriend's arrest. But the police weren't sure what connection she had to the drug trade besides her boyfriend. Anna had never been arrested for a drug offense. It wasn't long before Anna's case was considered cold. 6 months later, there was another murder in Long Branch, New Jersey. 51-year-old Nicholas Connors was found dead in his home. He had been shot multiple times in the head while he sat on the couch in his living room. His wife, 42-year-old Dolores Connors, had come home from work and found him dead. There were 2 children sleeping in the house and they were unharmed. It turned out that Anna and Nicholas had a personal connection. Nicholas was married to Anna's sister, Dolores. Anna was close to her sister and her brother-in-law. Anna considered them to be her mother and stepfather. In fact, that's what they're called in Anna's obituary in the newspaper. Because Anna and Nicholas were related by marriage, the police thought that the murders were connected. But other than being very close in-laws, the police could not figure out how they were connected. Years went by, and there was not much progress made in either case. In late 2019, 25 years after Anna Mejia's murder, the police reviewed both cases. One thing that caught their attention was that Dolores Connors, Nicholas's wife, got a life insurance payout after Nicholas's death. She received about $200,000. This caught their interest, but there was a problem. Dolores had an airtight alibi for the time of Nicholas's murder. She was at work when Nicholas was killed. Dolores had a son, whom Nicholas adopted, named Ted Connors. The detectives found notes from interviews that were conducted with Ted's friends during the initial investigations in 1994 and 1995. A few of them said that Ted and his friend, Jose Carrero, had confessed to killing both Nicholas Connors and Ana Mejia. Ted was technically Anna's nephew, but she was apparently more of a sister to him because of their non-traditional family dynamic. At the time of Anna's murder, Ted was 21 and Jose was 22. The detectives also found a transcript of a phone call that the original investigating detectives recorded between Ted and his friend. During the call, Ted confesses to killing his adopted father, Nicholas. The detectives tracked down Jose Carrero. In early 2020, he was 48 and he was living in Jacksonville, New Jersey. After a few hours of interviews, Jose confessed to his part in the murders. He said that he and Ted committed the murders on the orders of Dolores Connors, Nicholas's wife and Anna's sister. It turned out that Dolores and her son, Ted, were selling drugs. After Anna's boyfriend was arrested for possession, Dolores thought that Anna was a police informant and she was the reason he was arrested. Dolores was convinced that Anna was going to get her arrested next. Jose said in late 1994 that he was living with Dolores, Nicholas, and Ted. He said that Dolores offered him a few $1,000s to help Ted kill her sister. Jose said that all three of them sat in the kitchen and discussed how to commit the murder. They even figured out an alibi. On the night of the murder, Jose said that he and Ted went to a party. They snuck out and drove to Anna's neighborhood, but parked a block away from her apartment building. Jose said that he and Ted went over to Anna's apartment and she let them in. Once they were inside the apartment, Anna went back to the bedroom. Jose said it was Ted who stabbed Anna. Jose claimed that he just put a pillow over Anna's face because they did not want to look at her face while she died. After the murder, they went back to the party and pretended they never left. Jose said he didn't get paid the money for helping with the murder, but he did borrow an undisclosed amount of money from Dolores and never paid her back. He also continued to live in her home rent-free. As for Dolores' husband and Ted's adopted father, Nicholas, the motive for the murder was simple. Dolores wanted the $200,000 payout from his life insurance policy. Jose said that once again in the kitchen, the three of them planned out how to carry out the murder. They decided to do it while Dolores was at work so the police would not suspect her. Ted and Jose cut the screen on the sliding door to make it look like someone had broken in. Nicholas was in the living room watching television. Jose said that he sat on the other end of the couch and started talking to Nicholas. This was just a way to distract him. Ted snuck up behind his adopted father and shot him multiple times in the head. Jose said that he and Ted ran away from the house, got into their car, which was parked a block away, and they drove off. After they drove away, they ditched the gun. Jose said that he lived rent-free with Dolores and Ted for a few weeks, and then Dolores kicked him out. On January 10, 2020, 26 years after Ana Mejia's murder and 25 years after Nicholas Connors was killed, Dolores, who was using the last name Morgan, and her son, Ted Connors, and Jose Carrero, were charged with murder. At the time, Dolores, who was 66, and Ted, who was 47, were both living in Delray Beach, Florida. They were arrested and extradited back to New Jersey. In February 2020, Jose pleaded guilty the 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. At Jose's hearing, he said he was going to testify against Dolores and Ted. No court date has been set, but Dolores and Ted are both being held in jail until their trials. Number 2. Pamela Maurer. In early 1974, 16-year-old Pamela Maurer lived in the village of Woodbridge, Illinois. Pamela lived with her parents, her 2 brothers, and her sister. She was a quiet and shy girl who was popular in her own circle of friends. On the night of January 14, 1974, Pamela was hanging out at the home of a friend who lived 2 blocks from her own home. At about 9:45 p.m., Pamela left on her own to go to a McDonald's that was about 3/4 of a mile away. She was supposed to return to her friend's home, but she never did. She did not go home either. She was reported missing 2 hours after she left to go to the McDonald's. The next morning, her body was found lying beside the road in the village of Lisle, which is about 5 miles from Woodbridge. It initially looked like she was the victim of a hit and run. The medical examiner noted bruising on her neck, and he determined that the 16-year-old had been strangled to death. It is believed that she was strangled with a 3-foot piece of rubber hose that was found near her body. She also had been sexually assaulted. Biological material from the killer was collected and saved. In 2001, a DNA profile was built and inputted into the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, but no match was found. In late 2019, using the DNA, Parabon Nanolabs created a snapshot of the killer. Then, using an unspecified database, the investigators used forensic genealogy to track down the identity of the killer. The results led them to a cemetery in Darien, Illinois. In November 2018, investigators examined the body of Bruce Lindahl. Lindahl had died in April 1981 at the age of 28. In January 2020, the police announced that Lindahl had killed Pamela Maurer. The odds that the DNA would match someone else is 1 in 1.8 quadrillion. At the time of Pamela's murder, Lindahl was 22. Lindahl had never been convicted of any major crimes, but his history was dotted with violence. Bruce Lindahl was born in January 1953 in St. Charles, Illinois. He attended the same high school as Pamela Maurer, but he graduated 4.5 years earlier. Lindahl went to college and he got a degree in electromechanics. After he graduated, he worked as an electrician for a few years. He then got a job at vocational school in Caneville, Illinois. Lindahl was well liked and he had many friends. One of his friends was a police officer with the Aurora Police Department. The officer even sold his house in Aurora, Illinois, to Lindahl in October 1979. Lindahl's friends said that he was a nice guy, but he had a short temper. Most people who knew Lindahl didn't realize he had an extremely dark side. The police officer stopped being friends with Lindahl after he arrested Lindahl on June 23, 1980. A neighbor of Lindahl's had called the police because a nude woman was banging on his door. The woman was 25-year-old Deborah Colliander. Colliander said that Lindahl had kidnapped her from a nearby shopping center and brought her to his home. He threatened her with a handgun, sexually assaulted her, and took photographs of her. She managed to escape and ran to the home of one of his neighbors. Lindahl was arrested, and his friend, who was the police officer, never spoke to him again. Lyndall was charged with aggravated kidnapping, rape, and deviant sexual assault. He was released on bond until his trial in October 1980. Before his trial, Lyndall told a friend that if Colliander didn't testify, then he would beat the charges. On October 7, 1980, 25-year-old Deborah Colliander disappeared after leaving her place of employment in Aurora. When she didn't appear at Lyndall's trial, the charges against him were dismissed. A year and a half later, on April 4, 1981, the police were called to an apartment in Napier, Illinois. A woman had come home to her apartment and found her boyfriend, 28-year-old Bruce Lyndall, lying dead on the floor next to another dead man. The second man was identified as 18-year-old Charles Huber. Huber had been stabbed 28 times, and Lyndall bled to death after his femoral artery was cut. Lyndall most likely bled out in minutes. Initially, the police thought it was a double homicide. Then, after some investigating, the police concluded that, in a frenzied attack, Lyndall accidentally cut himself, and this caused him to bleed to death. The police traced the last steps of the men. It's believed that they met at a bowling alley earlier that evening. At some point, they went to Lyndall's girlfriend's apartment where the attack happened. A year later, on April 28, 1982, Deborah Colliander's remains were found in a shallow grave in a farmer's field in Oswego Township, Illinois. The cause of death could not be determined. The medical examiner labeled the death a homicide. The police believe that Bruce Lyndall killed her. When the police announced that Pamela Maurer's murder had been solved, they also said that they think that Bruce Lyndall might have been a serial killer who was responsible for a dozen murders. The police did not say what other murders Lyndall might be connected to, but there were several unsolved murders that happened in the area where Lyndall lived. At the end of summer 1971, Mary Conder was 29, and she was the married mother of 2. Conder and her family lived in a rural home outside of Napier, Illinois. On the morning of September 17, 1971, Conder was at home with her 2-year-old son. Her daughter was at school, and her husband left early that morning to go to work. A friend stopped by their home and found the back door open. Conder's friend found her dead on the kitchen floor. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed 11 times, 10 times in the chest and abdomen, and once in the back. Her daughter was unharmed. On May 13, 1974, 18-year-old Karen Sue Schuchard was dropped off at an intersection near a shopping center in Glen Ellen, Illinois. Schuchard was an honors student and an accomplished pianist. She lived in Glen Ellen with her parents and her 2 younger sisters. That afternoon, Schuchard was going to do some shopping and then head to her part-time job. She didn't make it to work, and she was reported missing that evening. Less than 2 weeks later, her body was found floating about 23 miles from where she was last seen in a river in Geneva, Illinois. The cause of death was suffocation. On November 5, 1979, 16-year-old Deborah McCall left school and she was never seen again. Her remains have never been found. McCall went to the same high school in Downers Grove, Illinois as Pamela Maurer and Bruce Lyndall. Deborah went missing about 5.5 years after Pamela was killed, and about 16 months before Lyndall died. The police said that they are trying to piece together Bruce Lyndall's background. They think he may have more victims than the 12 possible ones they are aware of. But for now, They consider the murder of Pamela Maurer to be solved after 44 years. Number 1. The Pillowcase Rapist. The first recorded pillowcase rapist attack happened on May 1st, 1981. A clean-shaven white man in his 20s got into the apartment of a woman in her 20s. She lived in the Elysian Lakes apartment complex in Miami, Florida. The man blindfolded her with a pillowcase and then raped her. Over the next 5 months, 4 more women in the Elysian Lakes apartments were sexually assaulted in their home. Another woman said a man broke into her home, but she screamed and he ran away. 2 hours later, one of the other women in the apartment complex was attacked. Besides all taking place in the same apartment complex, there were other similarities between the attacks. All the victims were slender, young, white professional females who lived alone. Each time, the rapist entered the woman's apartment through an unlocked sliding glass door. All of them were blindfolded with a pillowcase. They all described the rapist the same way. He was clean-shaven and he had dirty blonde or medium brown hair. He was between 5'8" and 5'11", and he weighed around 170 pounds. He was fair-skinned, but he was often tanned. The victims also noted that his hands weren't rough or calloused. Some of the women said he was holding a knife when he attacked them. Over the next 2 years, at least 6 more women in South and Southwest Miami were attacked in their homes. Like the first 5 victims, they were slender, white professional females who usually lived alone in an apartment or condo complex. Sometimes the attacker wore a mask. When he didn't wear a mask, he blindfolded the women, often with a pillowcase, or he put a pillow over their faces. The other victims described him in the same way as the earlier victims. They also said he was soft-spoken. The police were worried because it appeared he was getting bolder and more violent. In one assault, he sexually assaulted a woman after tying up her roommate and leaving her in another room. In December 1983, he stabbed a woman in the stomach with a sharp object, possibly an ice pick. Between December 1983 and February 1985, his total amount of known victims rose to 40. All the victims were slender, attractive women, and all but one lived in condos or apartments. They ranged in age from 17 to 43. Each time he got into their home through an unlocked window or sliding door. The investigators suspected that he watched his victims for hours before he broke into their home. Also, his pattern had changed slightly. He used to break in just before dawn and catch his victims sleeping in bed. In his later attacks, he would enter his victims' home in the early evening and then sneak up behind them and grab them from behind. In April 1985, the pillowcase rapist broke into a woman's home and she managed to get a good look at his face. Then the woman's husband came home and he also got a look at the man's face. The husband punched the attacker in the face and he ran off. The woman and her husband gave a description of the attacker and it resulted in this sketch. Over the years, the police had several suspects. One of the most promising suspects was an ex-police officer named Pedro Gabriel Gonzalez. In September 1985, Gonzalez shot his 27-year-old girlfriend to death. After Gonzalez was arrested, he said that he was the pillowcase rapist. The police had a sample of the pillowcase rapist's blood. It was the mid-1980s, so creating a DNA profile from the blood was still a few years away. But what the investigators did know was that the pillowcase rapist had type O blood, which is the most common blood type. About 38% of people have type O blood. However, the pillowcase rapist had a rare subgrouping of type O. Only 1% of the population has that subgrouping. So the police were quickly able to eliminate a suspect with a blood test. That's exactly what they did with Pedro Gabriel Gonzalez. He did not have the same subgrouping, so he was ruled out as a suspect. When Gonzalez confessed in September 1985, the number of known victims was 43. In February 1986, the pillowcase rapist struck again. The woman convinced him that she didn't need to be blindfolded because she could barely see without her glasses. But it was a ruse, and she gave the police the best description of the serial rapist to date, and it resulted in this sketch. It was the last known attack by the pillowcase rapist. A month after the last attack, in March 1986, a task force was started to investigate the assaults. Since May 1981, there have been 44 known victims. But the task force was disbanded after a year without identifying the pillowcase rapist. What happened to the pillowcase rapist after that was unknown. There was speculation he moved away, or he was arrested for another crime and he was in prison, or he may have even died. Decades went by and there were no breaks in the case, nor were there any known attacks. Then in 2019, the police got a massive lead. A 29-year-old man was arrested for domestic violence. It was a felony, so the police collected a sample of his DNA. When the man's DNA was inputted into the database, the police were alerted that there was a familial match to the pillowcase rapist. The DNA testing indicated that the man was the son of the rapist. The police checked the records and learned that the man's father was 60-year-old Robert Eugene Kohler. Kohler was 21 years old when the attack started and 26 when it came to an end. Over the years, Kohler held several jobs. For a while, he laid pipe, he also worked as a handyman, and he worked at a family deli. Kohler had a criminal record, and he was a registered sex offender. He had only been convicted of one crime. On October 14, 1990, a woman in Palm Beach, Florida called the police to tell them she had been raped in her home. She said that about 3:30 a.m., she awoke to find a man in her bedroom. He placed a pillow over her head and then raped her. She did not get a good look at his face. She was sure that the man got into her home through the front door because she had left it unlocked. The police investigated the attack and learned that 31-year-old Robert Kohler had been given a ticket for an illegal turn around the time of the rape, less than a block from the woman's apartment. Kohler voluntarily came to the police station for questioning. A detective asked him what he was doing in that area at that time. Kohler said he was just driving around aimlessly. After he got the ticket, he went home. The detective then asked him for a hair sample. Suddenly, Kohler had a whole news story about what happened that night. He said he had been driving and he came across the victim, who was drunk. He took her back to her apartment and they had sex. Since there were no witnesses, the district attorney offered Kohler a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to sexual battery and he was given an 8-month suspended sentence. He also had to register as a sex offender. However, this was before sex offenders were forced to give a sample of their DNA, which is why the police didn't have Kohler's DNA on file. No one noticed the similarities between the attack Kohler was arrested for and the Pillowcase Rapist attacks. Kohler entered a single woman's apartment through an unlocked door in the middle of the night and covered her face with a pillow while he raped her. But it was understandable that no one saw the connection. Kohler was arrested 4.5 years after the last Pillowcase Rapist attack. He was also arrested in Palm Beach, which is about 75 miles from Miami, and the cities are in different counties. After Kohler was identified as a possible suspect in the Pillowcase Rapist case, the police started trailing him. They swabbed the doors and a shopping cart at a grocery store that Kohler had touched. His DNA was a match to the Pillowcase Rapist, so the police got a search warrant. They also got a better sample of Kohler's DNA, and it confirmed that he was the rapist that they had been after for nearly 40 years. In the basement of Kohler's home in Palm Beach, he was doing some construction. Investigators said it looked like he was building a dungeon. On January 23, 2020, Kohler was arrested and he was charged with sexual battery with a deadly weapon and armed kidnapping. The specific crime those charges stem from happened on December 28, 1983, when a 25-year-old woman was raped in her home. In that attack, the woman was stabbed in the stomach with something sharp, possibly an ice pick. The police have connected Kohler's DNA to 24 other rapes. It is suspected that Kohler raped at least 44 women between May 1981 and February 1986. But the police strongly believe that he had other victims that didn't come forward. The police are hoping that now that Kohler has been arrested, if he does have other victims, they'll report their assaults. Robert Kohler had an arraignment hearing in February 2020. He pleaded not guilty. If he is convicted of sexual battery with a deadly weapon and armed kidnapping, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. The district attorney is looking at possibly filing more charges in the future. At the time of this recording, no other court dates have been set. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you found it interesting. If you're looking for some new videos to watch, why not check out my new channel, Chapter Dark, and see if you can solve the mysteries in the videos. If you like riddles, puzzles, or escape rooms, Chapter Dark will be right up your alley. A link to Chapter Dark should appear on the screen momentarily, and you can also find a link in the description box below this video. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a thumbs up. Please also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Roku. The links are in the description box. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching, and please stay safe.